Hey, hello everyone. I'm Ian Smith here from the MIPI marketing team, supporting today's webinar. Yes, today's webinar introducing the MIPI Debug Over family of specifications is the third webinar in our series of MIPI Debug webinars for this year. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Enrico to start today's webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to go through the MIPI Debug Over family. And so we'll talk about what is that? What is this family? And talk about what in our specification set that we have for MIPI, what's changed, and why are we introducing this, and how all of the different specifications within this family relate, and what's being addressed commonly across this family. Okay. We'll talk about functional network interfaces and the key capabilities of each of the specs within this family, and then we'll conclude up some conclusions and go through, obviously, your questions. Okay. So what is this MIPI Debug Over family? What it really is it's our way of putting a set of our specifications together, saying, hey, this set is about transporting our debug protocols over various different functional networks. So it's a little different than our NIDIN, or our narrow interface for debug and trace specification, where NIDIN is saying, hey, we have a particular interface that we're using for debug. We're not using it in its native mode. So for example, if we're going to do something like USB, we're kind of using the USB connector and saying, okay, we're bringing this information over, but we're not using it in a functional USB where we can do debug traffic and non-debug traffic over that particular network interface. Here with this debug over family, we're saying, no, we're going to be doing it over those functional, both with debug and non-debug together. So when we talk about debug over, we're really talking about, as I kind of hinted, we're talking about putting our debug protocols. So for example, from a MIPI perspective, we have our sneak peek for control, right? And we have various different ones for trace that we would put across it. So you can imagine you have these different types of debug messaging, right? Sneak peek, trace, maybe your own implementation defined protocol. And it's how you do those protocols and how you map it over. Again, let's go to the example of USB. How do I put that into USB packets and then bring that across that USB network along, potentially along with other non-debug traffic, and how that all kind of exists together. Okay. Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, you guys have done this before, right? We've had this before, right? And you're right, we did, right? We used to call them our Gigabit Debug specifications. So again, picking on USB, we had a Gigabit Debug for USB spec, right? We're kind of renaming it. That's part of this. This is what's kind of changing. That spec isn't really changing, but it's really, we're kind of maybe rebranding it, because what we really wanted to do is we started adding other specifications. So you might be familiar with our debug, we called it Debug for I3C, right? Well, we couldn't call it Gigabit Debug for I3C. Obviously, I3C isn't as fast as something like USB. So we kind of dropped the gigabit, and we were starting to get some inconsistencies with namings, and we didn't have a consistent, nice naming where it showed that these specs all kind of are similar. So this, in some ways, was kind of a branding. And so we started to use just kind of this debug over kind of terminology. So you'll see over there on the right, some of the specs that we already had, right, are debug for I3C, Gigabit Debug for IPS and USB. We've now just kind of changed them to show that they're all very similar. And I think if you watched the first webinar that I gave, they're part of this network interface set of specifications. And we said, look, this is just a family, right? We're all defining how these protocols are coming over these different networks. Now, one of the other things that we changed, you might have seen the little subtlety here of for versus over. It was a little confusing when you said debug for I3C. People thought, oh, so this is about how to debug I3C? The answer is no. It's about how we send our debug protocols over the over the I3C interface, right? Or over USB or over TCP/IP through the IP sockets. So we kind of changed that. There was a lot of confusion about that, especially when we started doing other specs like our debug over PCIe, and everyone thought, "Oh, are you talking about how to debug PCIe? Why are you doing that?" So we did that clarification as well. So it hopefully helps to know, hey, we're talking about doing debug over these various different networks. So you saw that. So we kind of simplified the name, made them consistent, got rid of kind of that gigabit name because it's not always high bandwidth. Plus, the other thing that we're starting to learn too is originally it was about getting the maximum bandwidth that you could out of all these things, right? Higher speed for maybe trace and things like that. But we're also noticing, especially with like USB, in certain applications, you're not necessarily using the full bandwidth. Maybe, a lot of smaller devices and things like that, you're not using USB 3 or USB 4, you're using USB 2, right? So it's not necessarily I'm always maxing out the bandwidth of these interfaces, especially when you're looking at maybe IoT or something like that. So we kind of just drop that gigabit because of this, again, not all the interfaces we're doing are gigabit, not all the use cases are that anymore. So we dropped that, and again, moving from for to over kind of clarified things a lot better there. So hopefully the idea here is really to kind of unify and bring these all together and say they are part of the same family, right? It's the same it's the same idea, it's the same principle of what we're trying to do, just over different interfaces. And again, and we'll see this in a moment, it goes back to, if you heard me in the first one webinar yesterday, it's about the layering. So again, this is one specific layer, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay. Actually, we'll talk about it now. So this is the layering again. Back to this. So when we look at this MDO family, we're really talking about that middle layer there, in kind of that purpley pink, which we call the network adapter layer, right? And so we're adapting the green layer, which is kind of our protocols, right? So you can see there sneak peek, our trace protocols, and adapting that to the network stack and the PHY. So again, we're defining that middle. How do you take, let's just take sneak peek. How do you take sneak peek and then put it into USB, or putting it into PCIe, or into TCP/IP, or whatever, right? And it's this whole family is just about that thing. And there's a lot of, you'll see in a moment, a lot of commonality of that definition. And it's really just, what you'll see a lot of it is just, okay, how does that packet, how do I put it into that packet, right? And things like that. And so again, we're back to this whole layering of, okay, we're going to define just this one piece, and you have all the other pieces and things. And as I mentioned, maybe this diagram is showing the MIPI way of doing things, right, with sneak peek. But also keep in mind too, you can put other network adapters in here, and you can bring in your other protocols, and you can see how we do this, and extend it to your implementation defined interfaces and things like that. So this family of specifications are addressing this, again, the same thing, just over different interfaces. So you can see here the items that we really focus on in this family are things like, how do you set up the connection to those protocols, and session creation, and how do you initialize it and get it set up, and have that kind of maybe contract between the DTS, the debug and test system, or your debug tooling, and the target system, the thing that you're debugging, right? How do you do that? We address management of the link. How do you make sure that that's all set up correctly, that you're getting into that stream with maybe the non-functional traffic, the non-debug traffic as well, getting that in there. Obviously, it's about packaging, right? Like I said, how do I do sneak peek into a USB data packet, right? So we talk about how you package that and how that's done. How do you, at that network layer, how do you address basic debug capabilities, maybe some triggering and things like that? Obviously, error handling, how that's going to be done for the various different networks. And again, as I mentioned before, we have these allowances to put in your own implementation defined networks. If you have another infrastructure that's coming in with its protocol, how can you bring that in as another piece at that layer, that network adapter layer into the network? So I kind of hinted at what does the family include today, right? So today, this is what we have in the family. So as you saw, we have the I3C, we have the IP socket, so that does TCP, UDP. We have USB, and we're currently working through and working on PCIe and UCIe, which hopefully you'll see towards the end of 2025. And as Ian mentioned, there'll be more discussions on the UCIe in the next webinar. But really, I mean, just so you all know, this family is really a recipe, right? We can adapt these and create other specifications where necessary. So as it says here in the blue box, if you think there's a network interface we're missing, come join us. Let us know. We just recently we added PCIe and UCIe, and as I kind of mentioned in the first webinar, we're very open and working with other organizations who have these different interfaces to get these defined. So there's been discussions on maybe is there usefulness with Bluetooth, for example, or some other interface that you're used to. We're definitely open to that, and you'll probably there's lots of discussions. And you'll probably see additional adders to the family, new family members, if you will, to this. And we're definitely open to that. But again, the whole idea of the family is to show that these are all related together, that they have those elements that I mentioned before. I wanted to kind of go through just a little, highlight a few things. I'm not going to go in depth on all of the different specifications, but I wanted to kind of give some quick ideas of what we're doing with these, and hopefully you'll pick up some themes of just how we're trying to take advantage of a particular network interface and really utilize it to the best that we can to get our debug protocols across. You'll see that we try to utilize the protocol as is, and if we need to do something like you'll see here with debug over IPS, we saw that there were some issues with reliability with the protocols, or with the transport, I should say. With the transport, we kind of made some adaptations to help us, and so you'll see those kinds of things that we did. Again, I'm not going to go through in depth, but I want to highlight a few things out of each of these, just so you can get, again, an idea of how we're doing it. So in alphabetical order, we'll start with debug over I3C. So again, here we're using the native communication. We take advantage of specific debug CCCs and debug IBIs to help with the communication. We've actually added in some optimizations in the recent version of the debug over I3C for HDR modes to get better efficiency out of I3C. We also handle things like broadcasted requests and things like that are in the I3C specification. And the other thing that we try to do too is, as it's mentioned here in I3C, we try not to require special hardware in the controller. Yes, you'll need some debug hardware outside, like if you're doing USB, you'll have maybe your a debug endpoint that you'll have to build, right? Obviously, but the main unit of the controller, we try to make sure that that's not. You don't need to have a specialized controller, so the controller that you're using and things like that, you can continue to use those. With IPS, as I kind of mentioned before a little bit, was, we noticed with UDP there were some reliability concerns, especially if you don't have a reliable link. It doesn't really help when you're trying to do like a trace stream. And so we added kind of this reliability layer on top of it to make sure that it helps with things like I said, with trace and stuff like that. So we added that into there to help. We have our own service, as it says here. I'm kind of working from the bottom up. The service names, so those are registered and such, so that we have consistency, interoperability, and things like that. And again, we allow for many different client and server models for our DTS and TS through this. And again, for IPS, we look at TCP and UDP for that, and it's defined over those. These two here, Debug Over PCIe and UCIe, again, as I mentioned, these are in progress. We are currently working through these. With Debug Over PCIe, we're really focused on the newer side of the specifications, 2 through 6. Again, it's about using it with the non-debug traffic, and being able to handle multiple PCIe devices and such. We try to minimize, as it says here, minimize the host and putting a lot of burden on the host. We try to do that. We will be defining our own DVSec capability to handle that debug traffic and such. With UCIe, we are taking advantage of what is built in the UCIe manageability. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. The next presentation will go through a lot of this, but we reutilize what's there, and again, we utilize that manageability baseline and add in on top of that our debug protocols into that structure. And into that, and again, reutilizing it, and putting in again the multiple sessions, putting the debug events and things like that. But again, stay tuned to the next one if you to get even more details about the debug over UCIe. And then the last one here on debug over USB, we utilize the USB debug, the debug device class, and add in how to utilize that and get the traffic over the USB. We can do, we're looking at all of the different transfer rates. Originally, we were looking at super speed. We're now looking at full, the USB 2 size speeds. And so we're able to handle that. The debug utilizes bulk. Our stuff is defined through the bulk transfer method. Okay. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of our specifications for this family. And again, like I said, it is a rebranding of some of our existing ones, and really showing how we want to bring these all kind of, that they're all part of the same happy family. And they work, and they're defined on the same layer, right? They're all defining the same layer. Their objective is the same. How do you get those debug protocols through a given transport, right? And so hopefully now it's a little more obvious of how these specs are similar, and that we're not debugging the transport, we're using the transport as a way to get that debug information, that debug communication, and those protocols across. So hopefully it makes a little clearer on that. Again, as I mentioned, it's part of the stack. So you take your, you take your network stack and you're going to build on top of that. So you take your USB or IP sockets, whatever, and you're building this on top of it. And the specification helps with that. And again, just to reiterate, we have ones that are already there, I3C, USB, IPS, and others that are there. And again, I encourage, if there is another interface of that you think, hey, that can take advantage of this, let us know. Join us. Help us find these other interfaces that can be very useful. Like I said, we were originally focused. If you look at our history of this family, we started with USB and IPS. Then we realized, hey, let's go to some of these lower bandwidth like I3C, and then we're back to some specific use models with PCIe and UCIe, and we're looking at what is needed. And again, back to the if I go back to my first presentation, the principles of the work group is looking for those gaps and filling those. So again, please join us and help us extend our family, if you will. So that's all that I had. Again, just as kind of some reminders, as I mentioned, if you have some ideas for the family and you want to get more connected with the working group, there's some information there. As Ian mentioned, he gave the handout. If you want to download it later away from this, there's the link there. And again, if you want to look at these specifications, at least the ones that aren't in progress are there, that you can go to our website and to go and look at those. And hopefully, like I mentioned, towards the end of 2025, the other two will be there for you as well. So with that, I think we can probably go to the Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Enrico. Great presentation. Okay, so we'll go to Q&A. We've got a couple of questions I can see in the chat here. Let me read those out. So first one, again from Robert, is MIPI providing reference code on both sides? And then a comment, DTS is inverted commas, normal code running on your host.
So at this point, we don't provide any real reference code to this. This was something that the working group has been talking about. Again, I think I mentioned in a previous webinar where we look at adoption aids and things that may help. So sadly, at this point, we don't have anything. So if you're trying to do, let's say, debug over USB, if you're looking for, okay, are there things that help me implement this on USB? We don't have that today. This is definitely an area that we've been discussing, and I'll just throw out, if you're passionate about that and want to help us out, please join us. We are definitely open to those kinds of things. Anything, just in general, not just the MDO family, but for any of our debug specifications. If there are things that help with adoption, again, we just simply call it adoption aids. Let us know, and especially if you can help us, we're open to that.
Yeah.
So I know that's probably not the exact answer you wanted, but that sadly that's where we're at today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you talked about adoption aids there, Enrico. Is it worth just maybe mentioning what we do have?
I mean, right now, the things that we have, obviously, we do have the specification, and we did make the specification public so that software developers and things that aren't actually implementing the actual hardware and such have the ability to go ahead and develop towards it, right? And give you those tooling or whatnot that you need to really make a complete solution. So that's one thing that we've done. There's other things that we are looking into it's to help with various different white papers or other things that, as you kind of led to, of, hey, are there some reference codes and things? We are discussing those items. Those are things that we are looking at. Again, today, those things are not necessarily available for this family. Just as an FYI, some of the other specifications outside of the MDO family, there are some things, like, for example, with SysT, there is a reference library and things like that we have done. But for the MDO family, at this point, we don't.
Yeah, I guess the same for I3C. There are some software tools associated with I3C, but again, enablers for debug rather than core.
Right.
Okay, let's move to the next one. Again from Robert, how to make sure something that you implement in an SoC will be supported by debug and trace tools?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, as part of the debug work group, I mean, we do have participation from tooling vendor, right? We have at least one tooling vendor that's a very active participant, and to make sure that we're not missing that other side of it, right? That we're not just hardware focused or you know the one side of it, right? If you look at that butterfly diagram that we call it, right, that stack diagram, that we're not just looking at the TS side, that we're looking at both, right? So we try to ensure that we have enough representation to make sure that we're not missing those things. As far as, okay, let's pretend for a moment, okay, I go and implement this, am I guaranteed that the software vendor or tooling vendor has it? Again, we don't necessarily keep track of those things. That's one of the things we don't do today. But I would venture to say, I mean, if you talk to your favorite tooling vendor, especially those that are listed as MIPI members, I would say they probably would support you there. That's as far as I can go because I'm not, I don't represent tooling vendors per se. But I think because we have that specification available to the tooling vendors, like I said, it's public, they are able to get them. You can build with it. Your favorite vendors can, if they're not familiar, your favorite vendors couldn't get familiar because they're able to look at the specifications and do things. I'm hoping we don't have barriers. Like I said, I know we had those barriers before of, well, I'm a tooling vendor, I'm not implementing it, I don't need, quote, the license, but I can't see the spec. How do I help, right? We've hopefully removed that barrier by making the specs public and available. That was definitely one of the issues that we had. If there are others, let us know. We're definitely open to that and understanding, what are barriers to adoption. Again, I guess it's back to the adoption aids thing. But I would contact your favorite tooling vendor and talk to them. Like I said, if you go, to the MIPI website, go to our membership, you'll see, at least last time I checked, a lot of the I'll just say popular debug tooling vendors are MIPI members. Various different, some are contributors, some are adopters, but they're MIPI members and they would have access to everything that they need to implement if they haven't already. And I do know that there are tooling vendors that do implement. So.
Okay, very good. Okay, thanks, Enrico. So those are the two questions I see in the chat. If anyone's sitting on any questions in the audience, please pop them into the chat window now, and we'll address them. A couple of my own questions, Enrico, whilst we give people perhaps a little bit of thinking time. Obviously, you mentioned about getting involved in the debug working group. How best is it, or what are the ways for people to get involved in the group and potentially influence the MDO specifications of the future?
Yeah, I mean, if you know it or not, there's a certain level of MIPI membership to participate in our working group. It's our contributor members. I would contact, you can go to the website, get the information, contact our membership group. Contributor members absolutely can come into the meetings. There's some trial membership to be a contributor. There's lots of different ways,
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, get involved, especially if you have an idea, you want to push something, I don't see any issues with that. I mean, in all honesty, again, I'll just go back to tooling, right? As I mentioned, some of the tooling vendors are contributor members. You can maybe push them, if you will. There's different ways, but really it's about, getting in there, contributing member,
Yep.
come join us. It's very easy if you are a member or a contributing member. It's very easy to suggest. You bring it up in a meeting. You could talk to me in a meeting. Talk to me offline. Talk to our program manager. We take company proposals all the time, and we have open discussions on them. So,
Yeah.
it's relatively easy, I would say. You bring an idea, there's some support, we go off, right? The same thing, you know. I'll use UCIe. They may talk about this a little bit, but even with UCIe, the UCIe consortium, you know, we talked with them, and they said, hey, can we work with you, and we'll use you. And so even at that level, we had a discussion. It wasn't a single member or what. It was together with that consortium
and that's,
to
I guess,
say, hey, this is the direction we want it.
I guess that's a slightly different route as well, isn't it? I mean, we have, you know, I think debug has a lot of liaisons. Can you kind of
That's right.
describe how those liaisons work and how they get sort of set
Yeah,
up?
with the liaisons, I mean, you know, we had with UCIe, they kind of came to us in some way with some help of, you know, MIPI member companies, kind of bridging them together. So we usually use through our member company contacts to bring those in. Like, for example, like with UCIe, my member company Intel, you know, we kind of brought them together and said, hey, let's work together. I, as the chair, have gone through many liaison agreements, worked with with the MIPI team to work with the various different ones, USB, PCIe, you know, the PCIe SIG, the USB-IF, the UCIe consortium. We just work together, and it comes down to just establishing, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to utilize your, you know, your interface specification for us to put our protocol on top of and get that understanding, and showing the value. I think that's really what it comes down to. Like, I'll go with UCIe. We found that there was huge value in saying, okay, well, we have this, you know, they had some infrastructure, we wanted to utilize it, and we had that great common, oh yeah, that's going to help everybody, both the MIPI members and the UCIe members. And that's what we usually have to show with the liaison agreement, that there's mutual benefit, right? And honestly, out of all the years I've been doing this, and again through all these various MDO specs that we had to work with, like I said, USB, PCIe, it's really been easy, right? Again, there's debug is one of those things where we all know it's necessary. It's a necessary evil, right? And so, you know, people see, hey, yeah, that makes sense. It's useful. Again, back to something I mentioned in the first webinar of, hey, it's cost effective in some ways, right? I'm reutilizing things, right? Everyone sees that kind of that value, and it's just more getting the, I don't know, the legal people to go talk and make it happen, so that, you know, we do this in a way where you know, we observe everybody's legal requirements and things, and get it done. And in certain cases, you know, in certain cases, MIPI's left to go write it, get it done, double check it with the other organization, and we go. In other cases, like with UCIe, we're kind of working together, right? So there's different ways too there that we do. But we've had a lot of great cooperation with those other industry groups to get our specifications, and get solutions for our members. So
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, two potential ways in. Then I think that the trial program's a great way to get involved in MIPI with a little upfront commitment. Many people, many new members coming through that route, and you can come and meet us at our member meetings, and join our virtual meetings as well. Give sample before you make a commitment, and I guess the liaison route is another potential more limited way in to some of our activities. So they're both
yeah, and the other thing I'll say too, I mean, I know I've had some other companies do this too, is, you know, I can talk to, I mean, I can talk to people, right? There's no problem. I can talk to you more about MIPI, what we do, get into more specifics before, you know, before you make that leap, if you will. That's fine too. Again, go through our MIPI channels. We can get in contact and have those discussions if you want more you know, more in depth. Okay, what are you guys doing, right? And such. There's no issue. You know, it's, again, we're here, and it's shown through some of our MDO specs, just to kind of bring it back to this. You know, we're here to fill those gaps where you need a solution, right? That's what we're here to do. We're very active. I don't know if you've seen kind of how much we've been releasing the last handful of years, we're a very active group, right? Again, we brought in PCIe, UCIe. These are new hot topics, right? Especially UCIe. We try to keep up with the gaps and try to address them. And you know, we encourage, I think over the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot of new faces, new companies because of things like UCIe as an example, and some other stuff that are now coming to the working group and participating. So we encourage that and open to it.
Yeah, I'm bringing it back to the discussion around the MDO specifications. Can you give any kind of shed any light in terms of future developments, anything that might happen in the future to add to the family, or any changes potentially perhaps to the architecture? Or
yeah, so some of the things that we've been thinking about is obviously, I think you hopefully you all joined Jason yesterday on the security. So there's going to definitely be some updates for security added in to the MDO specifications to help with, at that network adapter layer and such. So you'll see some more updates to security. I think that's been a hot topic, something new that we're looking at. So there'll be some updates for that. I think the other thing from a interface that we're looking at is, like I said, originally we were looking at high speed, everything high speed, get as much data as you can out, right? And so you'll see that through USB, PCIe, and so on. But I think there's also this challenge, especially maybe in IoT or in battery operated devices, I'll just say it that way, that it's not all about super high speed gigabit things, right? It's more, okay, how do I take advantage of some other types of transports that may not be super high bandwidth, but maybe the only transport I have? So for example, one of the ones that we've thought about is Bluetooth as a good example, right? There's a lot of smaller battery operated devices that only have Bluetooth. It's not like you're going to connect up PCIe, or most likely, because it's battery operated, you're probably not really going to get USB 3, USB 4. You're going to get something a lot less. But being a lot less doesn't mean it's not useful, right? There's still ways to get off things on that. We've also looked at more even slower interfaces where you may have to do kind of what I would call kind of your store and downloads, where you're not streaming that data out like you might be through USB or whatnot. You may have to locally store some things, and when you get the opportunity to connect, right, especially on these IoT devices that may not be always connected, but connect every hour, every 6 hours, whatever. When they get that opportunity, boom, it sends that data out, right? You get that log or whatever. Right, so we're starting to look at those kinds of things. So that's becoming an interesting area. I know we've had some discussions internally. I think for us, it's really finding some of those experts to come in and help us better understand those usages and what are the right interfaces, right? I mean, there's, especially in the IoT world, there's tons of different interfaces. I think we've looked at them and there's like 4 or 5 different ones, and some are competing, who knows? But those are things that we're constantly looking at in the market of, okay, what are your interfaces that you have? If you may not have USB, you may not have I3C, right? And UCIe was a great example. You have these little chiplets. They had no connection, right? So the only thing they have is UCIe, right? And so that was a gap that we had to go fill. Same thing with, again, back to these smaller battery operated devices. What do you have? You may only have Bluetooth, right? Or you may only have, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of other protocols, So I think those are the kinds of things that at least we've had some internal discussions. And honestly, we're looking for experts to come in and help direct us. Again, not all of us are able to see every gap, so definitely open to people coming in, pointing us to those gaps and helping us out.
Okay, Enrico, that's great. Great response. I think we've given our audience plenty of thinking time. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So it's probably a good opportunity for us to kind of wrap up for today. Any other final thoughts from yourself, Enrico, before I kind of wrap up today's session?
No, hopefully, again, I probably said it too many times already, but the idea is really to fill the gaps. What interfaces are important to you? What do your items go? Again, I'll stress the whole, hey, yeah, I think Ian, we talked, the first time about, yeah, we're rooted in mobile, but we're not only mobile, right? We're rooted there. So, if you have something like an IoT or whatever, AI or whatever you're doing, and there's an interface that you think, man, I would love to have my debug protocols over, let us know. Come join us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're rapidly moving into other areas, automotive, industrial, you name it, MIPI's there. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Enrico, for your presentation and answering these questions. And thanks to our audience for listening. And hopefully that was a useful session for you. So just to wrap up for this session, just a last reminder that we've had, we're having 4 webinars this week. This is the third of the 4. And we'll have one final webinar starting in around 45 minutes time, looking at MIPI Debug over UCIe. So please come back and join us for that one in a few minutes. I think that's it for today.
I'm interested in it as well.
Cool. We've at least got one in the audience. Great.
Well, yeah, and maybe, I don't know. So it's not, we have a member from the UCIe consortium also joining us there too. So it's not just
absolutely. This will be a joint presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is really hearing from them as well. So sorry for the plug.
No, it's good. Good. Okay, cool. So I think we've done our marketing for the next session. Yeah, we'll be back here in 45. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.